Alright guys, so we just talked about the 1950s and how they were Republican, right? So now we're going to kind of talk about activism in the 1960s. This is going to be led by some Democrats. So let's get started. So we're first going to talk about the election of 1960. So the election of 1960 is going to put JFK versus Richard Nixon. When you first look at those two men, you see that JFK is a lot younger, right? And people think he's pretty. All right. Nixon has been the VP, so his face is one that people know. So they had the election of 1960, and this was the election that first had their first public debate. And what happened was Nixon was pretty sick during that debate, and JFK has had a skin condition that just made him kind of look tan all the time. So on the first public debate, Nixon looked like he was sick and he was sweating and he just did not look good, and JFK is over there looking all young and pretty and tan, and people just saw that and they're like, wow, like Nixon's on his deathbed, let's vote for JFK. So JFK gets elected in the election of 1960. And when he gets elected, he puts out an idea called the New Frontier. All right. He was a Catholic, so he was ready to take an activist stand with this program. And he wanted civil rights legislation, health care for the elderly. He wanted to give money to education, urban renewal, and containment of communism. So he had a lot of very similar ideas as the Democrats before him. All right. One of the biggest things that he was kind of going to focus on, because we are in the Cold War, and he's going to take a hard line on communism. So his new strategy was to deter the spread of communism, was the flexible response. All right. So this was a strategy to deter the spread of communism by ensuring that third world rebellions did not lead to new communist governments. All right. So he said, hey, if let's just take Cuba because we're going to talk about that. If people in Cuba are going to spring up and want to become communist, we don't need that to lead to a new communist government. So we need to go and we need to fix that. So that's what the whole flexible response is. All right. Why was he able to commit to the flexible response? That is a very easy question, because we know that's from the Truman Doctrine, right? So the Truman Doctrine way back yesterday, that allows him to commit to that because America is going to stop the spread of communism. He also uses counterinsurgency, where you focus on training Army Special Forces to control and contain colonial rebellions. So the counterinsurgency is just where we're going to specialize, train people to control and contain these rebellions. All right, so we're going to have a test run of the counterinsurgency. In 1960, Fidel Castro seizes power of Cuba. Well, this is kind of that exact instance that I just talked about. So Castro, he is going to come into Cuba and he's going to try to give them a communist government. All right, so he is most definitely a communist threat, and Kennedy is going to send Cuban exiles and the American Special Forces that we just talked about to the Bay of Pigs, which is right here, to stage a revolution. So we do not want Castro to be in power, so we attack at the Bay of Pigs. Unfortunately, on April 17th, 1960, Fidel Castro crushes this revolution attempt. So we get crushed, America gets crushed at the Bay of Pigs by Fidel Castro, and this is only going to increase our issues with Russia and the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union is communist. They're cool with Cuba becoming communist because there's 90 miles, right? So there's 90 miles between the two. All right, so we do go home without the bacon. You're welcome for that really awful pun. We do not win at the Bay of Pigs. So here are just some political cartoons and some pictures that we see, right? So we're getting ready to talk about the Dangerfield decision in the week of Cuba. You see down here, we have Kennedy And then we're going to have this guy. He's going to be the Russian leader. We'll talk about him in a second, Khrushchev. And they're trying to keep a lid on nuclear war. And then here they are up here, both sweating, both sitting on bombs, ready to hit the buttons. All right. So we're in a place where really Americans are scared, so scared to the fact that some people build bomb shelters underneath their houses, and they're ready for this kind of nuclear warfare. All right, guys, there's writing all over this already because I thought I had typed it, but I had not. So we're going to be okay with the writing. So we just talked about the Bay of Pigs, all right? And so due to the Bay of Pigs, we are going to get missiles pointed at us. So the Soviet Union, they go and they insert missiles in Cuba, all right? So missiles in Cuba, and they're pointed at the United States. This obviously makes us very nervous. And this is really where we are getting those bomb shelters. We're having, like, you know how we have fire drills here? They have bomb drills. All of those things in school are happening because this really is a very tense time in America, and really in the world, because the whole world is going to be watching. So why would Russia come to Cuba's aid? Well, of course, Fidel Castro is going to install a communist government. And so therefore that they are going to support that. We tried to stop it, didn't work, but Russia's going to come to their aid. All right. There are going to be a few secret meetings between JFK and Khrushchev. Khrushchev, that is the Soviet Union leader. And that is how you spell his name. That's Khrushchev. I know it's ugly. I'm sorry. So they're going to have some secret meetings. We're also going to put a blockade, so nobody can go in or out into Cuba because we are extremely nervous. And so this really is one of the most tense moments in history, and it is going to end in 1962. The Cold War does not end, but the Cuban Missile Crisis does end, and that's what we call this whole thing is the Cuban, that's too many U's, Missile Crisis. All right? So that is what is happening, and it was really one of the most tense moments in the Cold War. And then our last slide for today is JFK. He got elected in 1960. He is going to come up with some liberal domestic reforms, and he's going to call them the New Frontier. So he does increase funding for NASA, which obviously helps lead us to the space race. He also is going to face, much like Truman, a conservative Congress, so they're not really ready for liberal reforms. And really, JFK doesn't get his feet moving very well, because he was elected in 1960, which we know he doesn't get inaugurated until 1961. But on November 22nd, 1963, he's going to be assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. All these pictures over here, all of those are Lee Harvey Oswald. You're about to see a video about the conspiracy theories behind that. I like conspiracy theories, and I do believe that it wasn't just Lee Harvey Oswald that killed him. So be prepared to talk about this when I come back, because we will most definitely be talking about Lee Harvey, JFK, and the Zapruder film. All right? This should be your third interaction. All right? This should be an easy one to answer that second question, how did JFK change America? And then also be sure that you do your summary. All right? I will be taking these notes up, giving you a grade, and then giving them back to you real quick like. All right, so I'll take these up on Monday. Be sure you have interacted in the Nearpod, and you'll have it out the door to finish in a second. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.